All right, let's move on to another theatrical release this weekend that we both got a chance to see. This one is called Vengeance. It was a 2022 Tribeca Film Festival premiere, and it is written and directed by BJ Novak, also starring BJ Novak. You may recognize Novak from his many years on The Office, where he was both a writer and one of the stars of the show, and he's kind of popped up in different places in the years since then. He's not exactly a guy with a very prolific output. He likes to, wait a couple years and then give you, like, what was the name of that FX show that had like an anthology thing going on with Lucas Hedges and stuff?
The Premise
that he did. The Premise, yeah. Right. So BJ, he did that, and he'll show up in spots here and there, but this is kind of one of his first real big projects, I think, post-Office, playing the role of a radio host from New York City, more of a podcast host, who goes to Texas to potentially solve the murder of a former paramour while also producing the podcast that will launch him and his career. Art, this is a bit of a blue state meets red state movie. Did you think that BJ Novak was the guy to give you insight into the things dividing our country?
I thought it was a decent movie. I like how you said it. He's compared it to NYC, Texas. He's like, you can either see this as a New York movie, a Texas movie. He says it's intellect versus gut, all these different aspects of it. It definitely comes off as a movie that's trying to meet both worlds, but it's still very much made by a New Yorker. It's still very much made by the city boy, I thought it was okay for what it was going for. I think it's two movies in one. It's trying to be like this kill the messenger type story that's trying to get to the corruptness that's happening behind the scenes there in Texas. And could there actually be something that happened to this girl? They even name drop the reporter from Kill the Messenger, Gary Webb. I would also compare it to The Dry, which was another movie that came out last year where it's a dude going back to a more rural town and trying to figure out what's going on, and is there more behind the town due to this murder? Is there more happening in the town that relates to this murder? And then at the same time, it's this black comedy where he is a New Yorker who has already made it. He's the radio guy who's already got all these accolades, and Issa Rae plays his kind of like manager, his boss, who's trying to pitch
his
to him
producer, sort of.
Yeah, that if you can pitch this new podcast story, can you make something out of it? And a lot of the inspiration for him came with having heard a lot of podcasts and seeing this world where you can create something and you think you're bridging the gap. But I remember I would ask Zach for a bunch of podcast recommendations, go on the road, and they're fascinating podcasts. And by the time you get to your fifth one, you realize this is just NPR, Serial, whoever it is behind this, sending somebody to go find themselves on this journey of somebody else's misery, never solving the case, but realizing every single one, there's social injustice behind this. And he's kind of making fun of that. He's like looking into this world where he becomes this podcaster and he wants to be over there because he thinks he's better than the Texans. He knows more than they do. And he's trying to mesh, like, what if we don't listen? We're probably not listening to them over there the same way they're not listening to us. Is this a movie that may bridge both? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, my I guess hang up with some of it is that I agree with you. It's kind of about how there are these different sides of the country and people who aren't necessarily listening to one another, but it doesn't really feel like he did a whole lot of listening to Texans. Like, a lot of the characters feel very stereotypical and thin.
Yes.
Yeah, a New Yorker's version of what a bunch of Texans would be like. Like there's this whole conversation where he's trying to get them to say why they like Whataburger. And it's like a Texan would be able to articulate that, right? They wouldn't just say because it's there. And
he's
and
an
I think there's
fan,
like
you could tell.
Yeah, there's almost he's imposing a simplicity sometimes on some of these characters. I do think there are some clever bits, but I also feel like there's just a little bit there was a little bit lacking with the story, right? Like a little bit of a lack of a drive, a lack of a pull. It felt a little bit like when things happened, it was a lot of the time to set up something funny rather than because it felt like it was the thing that had to happen, right? It's one of those movies where he gets invited to the funeral of somebody he doesn't know well, and because they wanted to create a funny moment, he of course is going to be pulled on stage to give some words, It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know, a couple too many moments like that where I felt the movie trying too hard and I wasn't actually laughing at it. But I don't know. It definitely wasn't like a complete disaster or anything. Just like an okay movie, not necessarily as biting of a satire as I would have liked or expected from BJ Novak.
Exactly. I think if he didn't direct it, it's one of those where maybe the writing is there.
I was thinking that as well.
And it's got a good story, and if someone else could handle the direction, it would have been more filling. I heard from behind the scenes that he does a lot of line reads, because he was when you're in Inglourious Bastards and you worked under Tarantino, you're gonna want to do some of the stuff Tarantino does, right? But
Right.
I think you see that in the movie where you had described about the Whataburger bit earlier on. That same character, it's the whole family who can't describe Whataburger. They do a bit where it's like, you don't know Chekhov's gun? I'm like, girl, if you know Chekhov's gun, then you can describe Whataburger as being a delicious place
Right.
where you can go in and eat with the whole family or something. And
Yeah.
it very much feels like his position on what a Texan feels like. And because of that, I wish somebody else would have directed it. I wish somebody else, I don't know, maybe would have written it or something like that. You said that a lot of the jokes feel just like setups. I feel like he put a board, and anything that a New Yorker does, he needed an opposite side for what they do in Texas. And sometimes
Right.
he would do a point A and force a point B, even though it didn't need to be there. It's still a very interesting mystery thriller where they dive into, all the jurisdictions there in Texas, where he's pretending to care about this girl who he just slept with for a little bit. But could there be something else here? Could he
Right.
possibly be solving a murder, or is he just proving what he's already said in his head? These Texans, they just would rather believe that a conspiracy is happening than the actual truth that might have killed their family member. There's a lot in there to like. I think there's a lot of very funny lines as well. And you had mentioned it earlier. The premise is another example of this, where if the whole point, as he says, is that Americans don't listen to what you have to say. They want to just listen to a story, right? That's the premise. He does a lot of ideological theories and themes, and he just puts it into a nice little anthology story. And I would say that the one with Bold Hoybrook that's in the premise, that also stars, it just played right there, Punisher. That one's really
Bernthal?
good with Bernthal. That's my favorite episode of The Premise. Go check that one out on Hulu.
All right.
That's like the best version of what he was going for here. He is definitely a guy who, anything he's ever written in a journal, he had his character say in this movie. I didn't know that he started in punk. Did you know that?
There's Punk'd has a pretty illustrious list of alumni. There's him, there's Dax Shepard, there's Bill Hader. It's pretty crazy.
So he's able to bring some people from Punk'd in here, and they give you a nice little flip in there. I would recommend the movie.
Speaking of which, what did you think? Because there is a pretty interesting cast list here beyond BJ Novak, as you alluded to. Ashton Kutcher plays a big role. You mentioned Issa Rae earlier. We also have J. Smith Cameron, a lot of people's favorite from Succession. Anybody stand out to you?
Really quick. It's Ashton what?
Kutcher?
I've said Kutcher, but I've heard Keecher, and so now
I think
I'm
it's
confused.
Kutcher. I don't think it's
Ashton
Kutcher.
is
I
in
think
the movie,
that's yeah.
I will say my favorite one, and I don't know if this is a spoiler, but it happens at the beginning of the movie, and it is a guy who BJ Novak is actually friends with. You could easily search it up right now. I just don't want to spoil it for those of you who haven't seen the movie. And he's playing himself. I needed confirmation for that because the credits just say he's playing the same name.
His first name, yeah.
He's come out and he goes, I think this is who people think I am, so I decided to give it to them in the movie. He also works on the music, but so does Finneas. There was an interesting point in this where Finneas does the score for the movie, and BJ is going out saying that he was the first one to get Finneas as a composer, even though that's not true because Finneas already did it for the Fallout earlier this year. But hey, you're the first theatrical. A lot of talent behind the scenes. Another one I learned.
Yeah.
You had mentioned Jerry. Do you know who Jerry's married to?
I used to know this, but
Kenneth Longerman.
Oh, right. Yes. The playwright, the dude who did Manchester by the Sea.
I would have never thought, bro. I would have never thought.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
overall, I like the movie. I'm tempted to give it a rent it, but I think there's enough in there that I enjoy to want to give it a junior price. It's almost like I would want to discuss the movie further with somebody as opposed to giving it another watch, because I feel you get everything the first time through. He just definitely jam packs it in with every single line. There is a point where a character is saying something very like intellectual, and I found it funny that he wrote that line, gave it to his actor, and then stars as himself, nodding to the line that he wrote that a character says where he goes, "That's really smart."
Right.
That's this movie.
Totally. Yeah. I think I'm a little more mixed negative on it than you, but
really,
yeah, especially if you are curious about him or this cast, look, it's probably worth the rent.
Sounds fair. Vengeance.
All right.